January of 1970, Spearhead from Space was transmitted on BBC One in the UK over 4 weeks in full colour. Well, for a lucky few anyway. Well received by viewers at the time and highly regarded by the new generation of fans more than 50 years later, this story has well and truly stood the test of time. It's often cited as a great jump-on point for new Doctor Who fans of the series looking to explore classic Who. It's in colour, the pace and style of the stories from this point are much more digestible to new audiences. Against the backdrop of man landing on the moon only 5 months earlier, the Vietnam War going into its 15th year, environmental concerns gripping the conscience of most have paid attention, and Concorde making its maiden flight, this really was a time of monumental change. We were pushing the boundaries of technological advances and exploring other worlds, but at the same time becoming very aware of our own endangerment of our own. And Barry Letts, newly commissioned producer of Doctor Who, and Terence Dicks, also newly appointed script editor, picked up on these fears and hopes and gripped them tight and took Doctor Who into new landscapes. This new era of Doctor Who, now led by Jon Pertwee, Caroline John and Nicholas Courtney, was thrust upon audiences. So today I take an in-depth look at the story behind the story and make a bold statement. By today's standards, Spearhead from Space would be considered as a series reboot. In late 1968, during the Patrick Troughton era as the second incarnation of the Doctor, then producer Peter Bryant and script editor and ad hoc producer Derek Sherwin were aware of big changes on the Doctor Who horizon. The stars of his series, Patrick Troughton as the Doctor, Fraser Hines as Jamie McCrimmon, and Wendy Padbury as Zoe Herriot, had all expressed reservations about returning after the current series. Season 6 was broadcast for 44 weeks of continual episodes between August of 1968 and June of 1969, and this would have been a factor in their reservations. Time off filming was limited, as were opportunities to take on other roles. Bryant and Sherwin were also made aware that Season 6 would be the last to be shot in black and white, with the following season scheduled to be transmitted in colour. The BBC had started transmitting programmes in colour on BBC Two in 1967, with BBC One broadcasting its first colour programme 2 years later on the 15th of November 1969. A concert by Petula Clark from the Royal Albert Hall shown at midnight, which led the way for a number of other colour broadcasts the following day. The stage was very much set for a colour Doctor Who, with BBC bosses keen to get one of their flagship Saturday shows broadcast in full colour. It was also felt that a colour production would make the series more attractive to overseas buyers, especially the US, who were a good 10 years ahead in respect of colour broadcasts. However, this didn't mean everyone in the UK would see the upcoming series in colour. This required an upgrade to a colour television set and a purchase of a colour television licence, the price of which was double that of a black and white one at £10 a year, equivalent to £138 a year in 2025.
See, well, that sounds pretty serious.
Colour broadcasts could only be transmitted by newly installed colour masts, and in 1970 only around 50% of the UK could receive a colour signal. Of this number, only a few households had the much more expensive colour TV sets, so while other colour broadcasts were made in 1970, much of the UK did not actually watch programmes in colour until many years later. Most UK audiences didn't get to see Doctor Who in colour until well into the Tom Baker era, when the UK uplift in colour television rentals finally took traction, mainly via radio rentals. For those of you born after 1990, yes, television rental was the norm. This presented a financial challenge for the production team. The colour filming was to significantly increase production costs. But given the limited number of colour television licenses that had been bought by the viewing public, there was little by way of a budget uplift. Both Bryant and Sherwin had a dilemma on their hands: how to produce a new season of Doctor Who in full colour but without this extra money. To add to the pressure, falling viewer figures and audience appreciation of Doctor Who meant that if the series was to survive, the quality of the programme couldn't be sacrificed. During the filming for Season 6, Patrick Troughton, Fraser Hines and Wendy Padbury had still not committed to the next season. Derek Sherwin took on full production responsibility towards the end of Series 6, due to Peter Bryant being pulled over to another BBC project. He started to pull together his plans for the upcoming Season 7. He was informed that the series will be much shorter than the current one in an effort to reduce costs. And it was under these constraints that Sherwin formulated a plan, rather than set these new colour stories on expensive sets of alien planets, space stations and outer space. The Doctor could be based on Earth and fight an alien invasion threat from there. Bring the monsters to the Doctor, rather than the Doctor finding them. Likely inspired by the cult TV programs of the 50s featuring the fictional character Bernard Quatermass, Sherwin thought the Doctor could play the role of a scientist tasked with protecting the Earth from alien threat. The mechanics of how this would be achieved will be developed later. However, the seed was sown. The Doctor would be grounded on Earth for at least the next series. This, as we will see, would not be restrictive on the programme. On the contrary, it allowed Doctor Who to explore new ways to terrorise children using the powerful concept of fear from the familiar. Derek Sherwin pitched this idea to Sean Sutton, then BBC head of drama, who approved the concept. It's well documented that this would have been the setting for Series 7, irrespective of Patrick Troughton staying on or not. During Season 6, both ratings and interest in Doctor Who was dropping. ITV, the BBC's only main rival, was showing imported science fiction programmes against Doctor Who, and viewer feedback on the series was becoming tepid against this competition, which was made with much higher budgets. A change was needed.
And it seems not a moment too soon.
Eventually, Patrick Troughton did announce his intention to leave during Season 6. I can't help but think that, in hindsight, this was positive for the series. Not that I dislike Troughton, in fact his era contained some of my favourite stories, but his departure set in motion a domino effect that cleared the way for a series reboot that very likely guaranteed its future. Shortly after Patrick's announcement, Fraser Hines and Wendy Padbury decided that they would both leave at the same time. Not long after, Peter Bryant formally announced his full departure, as did Derek Sherwin. They had set in motion the changes and felt it was the right time to move on. Sherwin did commit to staying on to oversee the transition of the production into the first story of Season 7. The wheels were in motion for a wholesale change, but Derek Sherwin and Peter Bryant had one more task before they were ready to move on. Unlike the first regeneration of the Doctor, it was decided the new Doctor need not be revealed in the finale of the War Games, giving the production team the luxury of time to find their man. This was unique in Classic Who. Every incoming Doctor, with the exception of Jon Pertwee, were featured in an overlap story of the predecessor. Hartnell to Troughton in The 10th Planet, Pertwee to Baker in Planet of the Spiders, Baker to Davison in Logopolis, Davison to Baker in The Caves of Androzani, and Sylvester McCoy, to Sylvester McCoy in Time of the Rani. For the task of casting the new Doctor, Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin reported only having one name on their list. Ron Moody. He starred as Fagin in the stage play and movie Oliver Twist. However, he reports that he turned down the role, something that he always regretted. Said Peter Bryant, "I went through Spotlight, the casting directory, and thought about it. My first choice was Ron Moody, who had played Fagin in the musical Oliver. I felt he would bring something special to the role. When I approached him, though, he turned it down. The other person I had in mind was Jon Pertwee. Again, that was on the basis that he was somebody who had the personality to bring something to this difficult, nebulous part which on paper means nothing. Jon Pertwee secured the role after meeting with Sean Sutton and impressing Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin. Pertwee was thought to be the ideal actor to take on Doctor Who into this new era. He was dashing, tall and flamboyant. He has a personal passion for gadgets and cars and had, in the eyes of the production team, something fresh to reinvigorate the role. Said Jon Pertwee, I went to see Sean Sutton, who was head of drama at the BBC and a very old friend. We'd started in the business together. I said, how do you want this played? And Sean replied, well, as you. I said, what is me? I don't know what I am. You see, I'd always hidden under a green umbrella, meaning one has always played character parts. I've never played me. He told me, we know what you are. That's why you've been cast. And if you play it as you, it will come out all right. So, Doctor Who was me. Jon Pertwee signed his Doctor Who contract just 4 days before the broadcast of Patrick Troughton's final episode of the War Games. At this point, the baton was handed over to the new production team to prepare for upcoming Season 7. Peter Bryant and Derek Sherwin were leaving for a production Paul Temple, which needed some experience to steady a ship that the BBC felt was sinking quickly. Barry Letts was given the producer role. However, Derek Sherwin did agree to stay on for the initial story to assist in this transition, and Terence Dix was promoted to the script editor after a stint as assistant script editor and after co-writing The War Games. While Jon Pertwee had been cast by his predecessor, incoming producer Barry Letts was reported to be very pleased and enthusiastic about his casting. Barry Letts and Terence Dix had been briefed about the budget restraints and the decision to keep the Doctor exiled on Earth, a storyline that had been confirmed in the final episode of the War Games a number of weeks previously. Letts, Sherwin and Dick started to consider some of the production logistics. And knowing that they had a season now of 25 episodes rather than 44, they made a decision. Season 7 would only have 4 stories. Financially, this was smart, as it only meant 4 sets, 4 crews, 4 casts. A simple but effective cost-saving measure. It was decided that the introduction story for the Third Doctor was to be scheduled for 4 of the 25 episodes. Writing responsibility for this fell to science fiction screenwriter Robert Holmes. Born in 1926, he was both an army officer and police officer before starting his writing career. He would go on to have a long and successful relationship with the programme as a writer, and later as a script editor during the Tom Baker era. He had previously written the Autons and the Space Pirates for Season 6, and is credited with supporting then assistant script editor Terence Dicks with rewrites for some other stories in this season. To introduce the Third Doctor, Robert Holmes decided to adapt a story that he'd written previously for a 1965 movie called Invasion. In this movie, a mysterious male is hit by a car and taken to a local hospital where various tests return strange results regarding the male's biology, leading the doctors to conclude that this male can't be human.
He's not human.
The male slowly regains consciousness and explains to the doctors that he is in fact an alien and was transporting 2 other aliens in his custody. I won't go into further detail, as it's a great little movie with some nice twists in the plot. If you can find it, it's recommended a watch. Holmes had clear direction from Letts and Dicks. Introduce the new Doctor, introduce a new companion, reintroduce UNIT for new audiences, and set the foundation for the new Earthbound story platform. With the parameters set and the core of the story already in his mind, Holmes started to work with Dicks on the framework of this premiere story. With the confirmed departure of Wendy Padbury and Fraser Hines, a new companion was needed. The production team decided that they wanted something quite different for the 1970 series, and were keen to come away from the companion that was merely a prop to force the Doctor's explanations. It was felt the Doctor's companion shouldn't be a traditional companion, but more of an assistant. In actual fact, a female who was intelligent, independent, and would stand up to the Doctor. What played into this was the strong feminist movement emerging from the 60s into the 70s. Women were protesting for and winning more equal rights in many areas. The public feeling was very much swaying away from the traditional roles that women were seen to have up until the late 1960s. In the UK, protests against the Miss World competition, for example, and other political victories meant that women were starting to be accepted as equal and were gaining much more control over their own lives and decisions than ever before. Very much against this backdrop, Dicks and Holmes wrote the character of Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, played by Caroline John, and introducing this debut story as a scientific advisor to UNIT. While John Pertwee got along very well with Caroline John, he was quite clear in his view on Liz Shaw as a companion. Said John Pertwee, "In my opinion, Caroline John didn't fit into Doctor Who. I couldn't really believe in Liz as a sidekick to the Doctor, because she was so darned intelligent herself. The Doctor didn't want a know-it-all spouting by his side. He wanted someone who was busy learning about the world. Although Caroline and I worked well together, I don't think it did the series any harm when she left." With the introduction of such a strong, intelligent companion, a problem was created as to who was going to be the voice of the viewer when asking, "What's that, Doctor? How will that work, Doctor?" etc. Dicks and Holmes had an obvious solution lined up: UNIT. In fact, this was very likely the reason for the introduction of UNIT earlier in the Invasion, and was a precursor to this very solution. The Brigadier, and later Captain Yates and Sergeant Benton, would fill this gap by asking the question to elicit a response to keep the viewers in the loop. Said Nicholas Courtney of his initial relationship with John Pertwee, "All the UNIT headquarters scenes were filmed in an underground car park, which produced a somewhat hollow sound effect. At the beginning of John's era, he and I didn't find it especially easy to rub along with one another. He was still working his way into the new role and tentatively sizing me up. He always seemed to be everywhere at the same time. He had a certain mercurial quality and an extraordinary bubbling energy which always made him hard to pin down." The next missing ingredient required for any Doctor Who story was the enemy, or more traditionally, the monster. Gone were the plots of alien enemy base invasion, battles in space, or conflict on alien worlds. For this series and likely beyond, the writing team under the supervision of Terence Dicks would have to formulate very much earthbound plots with threats either coming to Earth or threats already present, for example the Silurians. This paved the way for an almost unique period of Doctor Who, and one which contributed heavily to the Haunted Generation era. The Haunted Generation is a term used by and to describe children who grew up in the 70s and 80s in England. that were both traumatised and captivated by the odd, eerie and uncanny content of television programmes and films that seemed exclusive to this period. Writer Bob Fisher coined the term and does a much better job than I ever could of capturing what it means in words. So, from his seminal 40 Times article, it's a feeling that I tried to describe, emulate and recapture for over 20 years without success. Until in the late 1980s, I heard a piece of music that so transported me back to that formative era of cosy wrongness that my 25-year-old self sat down in my childhood bedroom and gently wept. Woozy vintage synths pick out a melody straight from some long-lost BBC Programmes for Schools and Colleges module, while the spectral voice of a child repeats some indistinct playground holler, possibly played backwards on a loop. I've no idea, it doesn't really matter. The effect on me was profound. At last, I thought, somebody understands my haunted 1970s childhood. Someone else has experienced those same feelings of lost, hazy disquiet, of watching Children of the Stones on listless February afternoons and worrying about the ghosts that live in my grandma's bedroom. If these words strike a chord with you, and you remember watching the John Pertwee era of Doctor Who in the 70s, you will know exactly what I'm referring to. During this period, adults responsible for the content of children's television seemed to believe that the more terrifying the content, the more entertained the children were.
Yes, I see what you mean.
TV executives, or bosses as they were known then, seemed either not to care that they were traumatising the nation's children or had no idea. This time saw the likes of the Stone Tapes in 1972, Bagpuss in 1974, The Survivors in 1975, created by Terry Nation and produced by Terence Dudley, The Boy from Space in 1980, and later, but equally as upsetting, the TV adaptation of Chucky in 1984. And let's not forget those public safety films aimed at children. Lonely Water is still one that is imprinted on the darkest part of the minds of the adults that watched it as children. This was very much the TV landscape, and it spawned a generation of adults 40 years later that would look back on this period with a combination of awe, nostalgia and terror in a way that's hard to describe. It's often been said that children of the 70s were terrified by everything but scared by nothing. And it was in these early days of hauntology that Robert Holmes gave us his most iconic and memorable Doctor Who monster in the form of a living shop mannequin, the Autons. Terrifying as they were almost, but not quite human, unsettling as they could be seen, standing innocently on any high street in the 1970s, throwing a cold stare at any innocent child who happened to pass by with their parents. And the Autons, just like much of the Pertwee era, remain locked in the hazy hidden memories of the children of the 70s. You may be surprised to learn that the Autons do have a predecessor hidden within British entertainment culture. In the very early 1900s, a Mr. Frank Ireland went on tour of Britain and Europe with his cabaret club attraction. This was a human-sized and shaped contraption that he claimed was powered by cogs and wheels, which he was always keen to show to the paying audience. And he demonstrated it performing various tasks on stage, including writing its own name on a chalkboard. He later demonstrated it driving a car, which resulted in Mr. Ireland being fined by the local magistrate. The contraption attracted large crowds far and wide due to the unique nature of the act and the unsettling look of his invention. It was described by historical writer Jan Bordson as, "This extraordinary contraption was a mechanical robot able to walk, ride a bicycle and sign its name." The audience was quite flabbergasted when they saw the ludicrous figure, more than 6 feet tall and equipped with a hideous waxen head surrounded by long curls, walk stiffly and jerkily around the stage. And the name given to this machine? Enigmarel, the Automaton. During this exile period of Doctor Who, the writers, led by Terence Dicks, exploited a concept known as fear of the familiar. For the children of the 1970s knew that Doctor Who wasn't real, right? They knew that the moon's surface was a film set and that that spaceship wasn't actually in space. But ancient creatures living under the earth, or alien beings stealing our astronauts' spacesuits and returning to Earth. Now the fear was getting a lot closer to home and a lot more tangible. Thanks to Robert Holmes and the Autons, a mundane Saturday shopping trip was not as safe as it once was. While Robert Holmes maintains the credit for creating the Autons, their mannequin manifestation likely rests with outgoing producer Derek Sherwin, who, whilst on a walk through a town centre, observed how uncanny these shop mannequins looked. This, combined with the intention of Terence Dicks to introduce an enemy that had no precise form but the ability to take that of others, resulted in their now iconic appearance. And let's not ignore the fact that creating a Doctor Who monster in the form of shop mannequin was a lot cheaper than creating an alien. So everything was in place. The new producer was almost in place. The script had been completed by Robert Holmes, overseen by Terence Dix. John Pertwee and Caroline John were secured in role, as were other cast members that would play a significant part in the evolution of the series over the next few years. The stage was set for the new Earth Exile plot. In what initially appeared at the time to be a production disaster, due to an industrial strike, the story could not be recorded on the usual combination of film and video, nor were there any studios available for filming. As a consequence of this, the entire story was shot on 16mm film and on location. The operator of these cameras were not involved in the strike, meaning their services could be secured. This led to a much more dramatic feel for the story, unintentional but clearly adding to the feeling of a change of mood for the series. Whilst likely not noticed by most viewers on original transmission, given the low resolution, small screen size and black and white format, the almost unique look of this story has been very much appreciated by modern viewers. The visuals have a very authentic movie feel. So the cameras were loaded with 16mm colour film and were ready to roll for what would, to all intents and purposes, be the Doctor Who 1970 reboot. Filming started on the 13th of September 1969 and concluded on the 22nd of November 1969 in preparation for a January broadcast. Some of the locations included the Royal Horticultural Society in Surrey, St Pancras Rail Station in London, the Broadway in Ealing, the Wood Norton Estate in Evesham, and Wheelbarrow Castle Cottage in Radford. Due to industrial action, as mentioned, studios were not available for filming. Therefore, the production team had to identify suitable external locations for the internal shots. The conclusion of this filming took place at London Madame Tussauds, where resident waxworks were complemented with acting extras, including a number of production staff who were required to put on an Auton costume in the absence of some extras that didn't show. Speaking of production team members appearing in front of the camera, Derek Sherwin made an on-screen appearance as a unit commissioner. The iconic scene, the Autons smashing through the shopfront, was filmed in Acton High Street in London. The director, Derek Martinus, wanted a shot with them seen smashing the glass before rampaging along the road. Unfortunately, financial restraints meant this wasn't possible. However, with some clever angles, close-up shots and sound effects, the illusion was created, and this is now an iconic scene in British television. The post-regeneration shower scene did not feature in the original plot or script. It was only when on location at the house that the BBC rented did the crew see the shower room and quickly work a scene into the story. This nicely resolves the issue of where the Doctor found his new clothes, but created a debate that still goes on to this day about that tattoo. The same was true of the wheelchair down the hill scene. Derek Sherwin wanted to film this ad hoc to impress upon the viewer the new physical aspect of this incarnation of the Doctor. The Christmas 1969 edition of the Radio Times, the BBC's own listing magazine, contained a preview of the upcoming story, but much of the anger of Derek Sherwin contained within the article plot details with spoilers that were not intended for public consumption. He wrote a strongly worded letter to the editor expressing his concern. The Radio Times of the 1st of January 1970 heralded the arrival of John Pertwee as the Doctor for that coming week in a more pleasing article for Derek Sherwin. The Doctor got one of his many front-page photos, which is now an iconic photo of John Pertwee. The photo used for this was taken on John Pertwee's initial announcement of his casting. The clothing he was wearing was something he assembled himself. This went on to form the basis of the third Doctor's look. Said John Pertwee, "They asked me what I wanted to wear for Doctor Who, and I had all sorts of ideas. Then I got an early photo call, so I found my grandfather's own Inverness cape, a smoking jacket I had, and a frilly shirt from Mr. Fish. They thought it was marvellous." Bernard Lodge, a visual designer, was commissioned in late 1969 to create a new colour title sequence for the series. He'd previously designed both the original 1963 title sequence and the modified one for the first full Patrick Troughton season in 1967. Previously, he'd used a font rather than a graphic for the title logo. For his 1970 version, he used a graphic to generate the logo. Versions of this logo were used in one official form or another for the programme until 2018 when it was finally retired. In a unique moment for Classic Who, this new title sequence showed the face of the new Doctor before he'd ever been seen on screen. The original Ron Grainer and Delia Derbyshire theme was altered slightly to match the time of the new title sequence, and a more modern sting was introduced at the start, and the middle-aged segment was removed. The 4 episodes were transmitted on 4 Saturdays at 5:20 p.m. following Grandstand from the 3rd to the 24th of January 1970 on BBC One. UK figures for this story peaked at 8.4 million for episode 1, stabilising at 8.1 million for the final episode. This was a significant improvement on the highest viewing for the War Games, with episode 2 gaining only 6.2 million viewers. Viewer reception at the time was positive, but it's with modern viewing that the story has really attracted the highest of accolades. The story was novelised for the Target range by Terence Dicks in 1974 and retitled Doctor Who and the Auton Invasion. This saw the commencement of the Target series after a couple of special releases before it, and this association would continue for another 24 years. The story saw an early BBC Worldwide VHS release in 1988, featuring a cover by Sid Sutton. Various other releases were made over the following years, allowing new audiences to appreciate this story. The blueprint that was set so well by Sherwin, Letts, Dix, Pertwee and John in 1970 paved the way for the modern part of classic Who. This story felt different. It felt cultured and more complete. It had gone from a children's programme that adults enjoyed to an adult programme that children enjoyed. This was not just a new season, but new Who, and it was here to stay.
Thanks for watching, and I really do appreciate you staying this long. If you did enjoy this, go and check out my channel for lots more Doctor Who related nonsense. And if you really liked it, give me a like and a subscribe. It really does motivate me to do more.